Talk about this story. Let's show our viewers and our guests this story in the Times. Cambridge scholar Noah Carl sacked for questioning sacred left. So he says. I'm going to invite our next guest, Dibyesh Anand, Professor of Social Sciences at the University of Westminster. And Dibyesh was one of the many university professors, in fact there were hundreds, who objected to Noah Carl's appointment. They accuse his work of stoking racist, xenophobic, fascist and anti-immigration rhetoric, pursuing academically discredited lines of inquiry involving race and genetics and peddling pseudo-science. All sorts of allegations in that, and also, Professor Anand, you signed a letter criticising the appointment, in fact asking for him to be sacked. Why did you sign the letter?
I signed the letter because there are three major factors here. One is about him and research, second about the association of the particular person, and third, more crucially, is about the platform he gets through Cambridge University. Now, per se, there are various people who have right to express whatever they want to express. They can write whatever they want to. They can be racist, anti-racist. That's their choice, right? But the problem we have is Cambridge University providing platform and respectability by providing this fellowship without proper scrutiny. And after 1 year, we do know that when St. Edmund's College investigated, they realized that the way they had appointed, they were not fully aware of his writings. Writings include journals in Mankind Quarterly, Open Psych. These are journals that essentially far-right white nationalists. In 1930s,
and you read this work, have you?
Now, I was aware of this person, but usually we don't have that much time to read them because we'd avoid them, right? But once we recognize that a person of his caliber, let me put it that way, was appointed by Cambridge University, that's where we got upset, right? So it's more about why would any university provide platform to those who dehumanize large sections of population when they could have provided, when they're committed to diversity and inclusion. So therefore, the struggle was about university, whether it's committed to diversity, inclusion and duty of care towards students or not.
But just to be clear, you signed this letter citing the fact that you think his work, as you were saying, is stoking racist xenophobia, but you haven't read all the work that you think backs up those claims.
No. I've read his work, I'm familiar with his work, right. But you have to understand that, for instance, let's say I produce some amazing work which is quite good about democracy. And you also find that I also write in magazines and journals produced by Al-Qaeda or ISIS, right? Imagine that. Would my mainstream work justify my position at university, or would it be questioned because of my association with Al-Qaeda or ISIS? So in his case, there's a clear association with far-right white nationalist groups. And this is why, of course, we go back to reading the kind of writing he has written, and you look at Open Psych articles, he talks of, again, association of Muslims with the Muslim migrants with the criminality and those kind of things.
I mean, just to put to you that some of the pushback from Noah Carl himself, he says, contrary to the implications of the open letter which you signed, I have never actually done any original research on racial or population difference in intelligence. What do you say?
Now, I have not done any original research, but he has done secondary research. So if you look at his writing again, he cites people who have claimed to have done original research. And those citations are from essentially well-known Islamophobic far-right websites.
All right. Trevor, what do you think?
Well, two things you said rather disturb me, Dipesh. First of all, I could produce you by the end of this morning a list of about maybe a dozen scholars who have written in journals or blogs associated with Islamist extremism who are not being sacked. So next time I see 500 academics calling for those people to be sacked, I'll take this letter seriously. Secondly, what really worries me is, as a former president of the NUS, a long, long time ago, I really worry when I hear people saying universities have to be respectable. The whole point of intellectual curiosity is to ask questions that, by and large, other people do not want asked. Now, this guy, as far as I know, hasn't actually done this stuff. And let me give you a counterfactual to this.
Have you read his stuff?
No, and the point is he hasn't done this piece of research. So there's nothing to read about this. Let me just ask you the question. He wants to investigate these links. What happens if he does this research and it shows us, for example, we know London schools have gone from the bottom of the education league to the top in the last 15 years, and it's been shown by work done elsewhere that that is almost entirely correlated to the change in ethnic composition. More Chinese students, more South Asian students, more African students. Now, is that a bad correlation? And what happens if his research showed, for example, that I, black person, is more likely to be academically successful than the clever Paul Mason over there who happens to be white? Now, should we not know that? Would it not help us to understand the long tail of failure, for example, of some ethnic groups. I just can't quite get what the problem about inquiry is, rather than application of knowledge.
Okay, let me put it. Context matters a lot, right? So, for instance, and context matters in this case because it's not only about this particular person and whether he has a right to do that research or not. I would say people have right to do research.
But this particular person is being fired.
Now,
this is the question we're discussing. Not your general view about this, but this guy being fired. Deal with that.
We asked for firing of this person because, of course, he was being provided respectability by a particular university with the kind of research he did. And we asked for firing on the grounds that the research is, of course, very problematic. And secondly, universities are committed to diversity and inclusion, right? And secondly, they have duty of care towards students. It was initiated by students, not by academics. Now, let's say if someone produces a work which glorifies racial difference, right? But we have to go back to 1930s. I mean, by that
logic,
you're using... But are you saying that's what Noah Carl's doing, glorifying racial difference? Is that what he's doing? He demonizes racial difference in the sense of he demonizes minorities, and that's a problem.
Where?
In his work.
Quote one thing he's written.
Well, I don't know what his work. Precisely.
But just quote one sentence.
No, listen.
Because I don't know his work.
No, go and read his writing in Open Psych. Go and read his writing in Mankind Quarterly. And these are well-known
You can't quote anything, can you?
Why would I quote him? I mean, the point is I don't need to quote.
I long looking at it. From what you're saying, I find so much of what you're saying deeply disturbing.
Why?
First of all, I don't think you've spent very long. I don't think you have. I'm not sure you've spent long actually reading what this academic has been researching. I think it's incredibly refreshing to hear Trevor Phillips giving an opposite view on this. There is something so insidious about the way our academic institutions are piling together to crush any kind of alternative thought or inquiry. That's not what universities should be about.
Well, I'm going to just let Paul in here.
The alternative thought in question dehumanises racial minorities.
What is it, Paul? That's what I don't know. What is it? What is it?
Let me talk. And the reason we should be careful about this is because the enemy of this new reactionary movement, the new right, is the university and the regulated media, because these are sources of objective and verifiable truth. Now, for that reason, I want to see right-wing thinkers in universities, because it's there that their prejudices against black people, women, etc., are tested against the peer review and scientific method that the university has to defend. This guy in this Open Psych journal is part of a movement that wants to destroy peer review in the social sciences. He actually advocates a different method, and what it is, let's be clear, the Open Psych is a place that cites right-wing, far-right research, and it's a way of getting it into the ecosystem of academia so that students then quote it, not realising that it doesn't meet the same academic standards as normal social science.
But are we saying that certain subjects are off limits here? Are we saying that certain links that may or may not be proven between racial differences, between criminality, between genetic background, and these are difficult subjects.
I understand. It's not about taboo subjects, right? It's not about taboo subjects, right? It's about what are universities for. Yeah, universities are there to ask difficult questions. Free speech is and academic freedom is about... No. Except free speech idea was that you challenge those in authority and you're protected from it. When did free speech become about powerful people, let's say in this case, certain kind of white nationalist people who can demonize the minority? I'm sorry, but free speech history in Europe was largely about protecting the weak against the powerful, not the powerful against the weak. Now, in terms of the research part, right, I said this is not so much about only him and one person. It's about whether university should provide platform to far-right nationalists, in this case, who would threaten and who would make students very uncomfortable.
With the greatest of respect, neither of you has actually answered the question I asked you. What is it that he, not people that you associate with, what is it that he is doing, saying, or wants to do that merits him being fired? What is it? Tell me, give me one example.
College has done, you can imagine that the university is not... Wait.
Just give me one example.
The one, for instance, he talks about criminality and race, and where he talks specifically of Muslim immigrants and
what does he say about it?
He says that more Muslims would imply essentially more crime and more terrorism within the society. Now,
are you sure?
Yes.
Can you quote me that?
No, you go and check his Mankind Quarterly. I said Mankind Quarterly and Open Psych article. Just
to be absolutely frank,
what I find really interesting is two of you who are challenging haven't read his work.
Right.
And yet you are challenging whether I have read on why. One of the
things.
We've been talking for 5 minutes, and you have yet to cite some words that he has written. All you're doing is telling me.
All right,
that
Trevor.
You think
one of the other signatories has said that Noah Carl investigated investigated the links between cousin marriage and electoral fraud among Pakistani and Bangladeshi communities in Britain, and says that was obviously ethically suspect. I suppose there is a point in saying, what answer are you trying to find to what question? Why delve into those links unless you're looking for a specific answer to back up those questions in the first place?
There's a context we're talking about. The context of Islamophobia, context of racism here, and why would you do that? But listen, 1930, look at the nose and the feature of a particular person and say associate them with anti-Semitism. Would we say that's a taboo question, or should we revisit all of that?
Trevor?
But you're piling all sorts of things which have nothing to do with this specific guy and his proposition. The point I made early on is very simple, and it's a subject of substantial study, for example, in the United States right now. Why is it that Chinese students or students of Chinese heritage are qualitatively more successful academically than any other ethnic group, and that their success is not at all impacted by their economic background or their parental income or their parental level of education? Now, this is interesting and useful, because if we could understand why that happens, we might be able to do something to help those who are less successful. My point about this is a very simple one. You don't like him for all sorts of other reasons, but what you're now doing is saying that there are things we may not ask, which may be of assistance to people who currently are disadvantaged in this society. That's why I think it's wrong, and what makes me furious about this.
What's important, we have to understand again and again, this is about a particular person research and the association they have. We live in an environment of Islamophobia, racism, and do universities that are committed to inclusion and diversity, do they avoid respectability to them, or do they investigate their own process? In this case, I'll just conclude. Remember, Oxford and Cambridge, they have a particular problem. Of course, they nurture privilege, they nurture mediocrity through privilege. That's what they are. So in this case, at least they've investigated that challenge.
They're not here to defend it, and they would deny that. But thank you very much, Divyesh Anand, for coming on, because we're going to move on to Paul Mason's book. There it is, yes, big smile from you. Clear, bright future. And you sort of present two visions of the future.